The billionaire's perfectly composed face crumbled, a single tear tracing a path through her expensive foundation as the last heartbreaking note of the janitor's song hung in the air, shimmering like dust in a sunbeam. She saw not a cleaner, but a king, his soul laid bare on the ivory keys. But how did this janitor, a man invisible to the world, bring the most powerful woman in the city to her knees with nothing but a forgotten melody? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The gala was a symphony of excess, a glittering spectacle designed to celebrate power and the acquisition of it. The grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel was a cavern of opulence, its frescoed ceiling depicting ancient gods feasting in the clouds, a silent painted audience to the modern deities of finance and industry below. Chandeliers, like frozen waterfalls of crystal and light, dripped from the heavens, casting a brilliant, unforgiving glow on the assembled elite. The air was a potent cocktail, a blend of expensive perfumes, the subtle aroma of aged whiskey, and the electric hum of conversations that could launch companies or sink fortunes. Men in bespoke tuxedos, their watches worth more than a modest home, clustered together, their laughter low and confident. Women, draped in silks and satins that whispered against the marble floors, wore jewels that flashed with cold, hard fire, their smiles as sharp and polished as the diamonds at their throats. This was a world unto itself, a bubble of immense privilege where the concerns of the outside world were a distant, irrelevant noise. At the center of the most influential vortex in the room stood Sophia Reynolds. In her early 40s, she possessed a beauty that was as severe as it was striking. Her black gown, a column of shimmering obsidian, was cut with architectural precision, its stark lines a perfect reflection of her own personality. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek, intricate knot, revealing a face that seemed carved from alabaster, dominated by eyes the color of a stormy sea. Sophia was not merely wealthy, she was a force of nature, a titan of the tech industry who had built a global empire from scratch. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency and a tongue that could flay an opponent in a boardroom was legendary. She moved through the world with an unshakable, almost terrifying self-assurance, her every gesture, every word, a calculated display of dominance. Tonight, she was holding court, a small circle of equally powerful business partners hanging on her every word. They laughed when she made a dry, cutting remark, and nodded sagely when she offered a sliver of market insight. She had just closed a deal worth a staggering $900 million, and the victory lap was just as important as the race itself. Across the vast, polished expanse of the ballroom, away from the gravitational pull of the power brokers, a man in a simple gray uniform moved with a quiet, unobtrusive grace. This was David Chen. In his late 50s, David was a man who had perfected the art of being invisible. His hair was more salt than pepper, and his face was a roadmap of a life lived with more hardship than ease, etched with fine lines around kind, weary eyes. He carried an air of profound melancholy, a quiet sorrow that clung to him like a second skin. He was polishing the centerpiece of the ballroom's alcove, a magnificent concert grand piano, its ebony finish so deep it seemed to swallow the light. His hands, though calloused and worn from years of manual labor, moved over the polished wood with a gentle, almost reverent touch. There was a forgotten elegance in the movement of his fingers, a musician's grace that belied his humble station. He worked methodically, his focus entirely on his task, a small, still point in the swirling galaxy of the gala. Sophia's sharp eyes, always scanning, always assessing, snagged on the janitor. A slow, cruel smile touched her lips. She leaned in towards her companions, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur that was still loud enough to carry. "Look at that old man," she sneered, the sound cutting through the polite hum of the room. "Polishing that piano as if he has any idea what it's for. I bet he can't even play a single note. Probably thinks Chopin is a brand of vodka." Her circle of sycophants chuckled on cue, their laughter a brittle, unpleasant sound. One of them, a portly man named Gregory, added, "He probably thinks the pedals are for resting his tired feet." The joke landed, and the laughter grew louder, drawing the attention of those nearby. The circle of mockery widened. Sophia felt a familiar thrill, the intoxicating rush of power that came from casual cruelty. It was a game she played often, a way to entertain her court and reinforce her own superiority. Fueled by champagne and the arrogance of her recent triumph, she decided to turn this private joke into a public spectacle. She detached herself from her group, her movements fluid and predatory as she crossed the ballroom floor. The crowd, sensing a shift in the room's energy, parted for her like the Red Sea. Conversations faltered as all eyes turned to follow the billionaire CEO on her determined path toward the oblivious janitor. David was lost in his work, the repetitive motion of polishing a familiar comfort. The piano was a beautiful instrument, a sleeping giant, and he felt a strange connection to it, a pang of longing for a life he had left behind long ago. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice the formidable woman approaching until her shadow fell over him. He looked up, startled, his rag freezing in midair. He found himself looking into the cold, calculating eyes of Sophia Reynolds. He recognized her, of course. Everyone did. Her face was on the cover of business magazines and plastered on billboards across the city. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, a heavy, expectant blanket. Sophia's voice, when she spoke, was clear and sharp, each word a perfectly aimed dart. "You seem quite taken with that piano, old man," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. She gestured towards the magnificent instrument with a flick of her wrist. "Tell me, do you even know what all those keys are for?" David felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. He was a simple man who wanted nothing more than to do his job and be left alone. He clutched his polishing cloth like a shield. "I'm just cleaning it, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes fixed on the floor. Sophia's smile widened, a shark's grin. This was even better than she had hoped. The man was terrified. "Oh, I'm sure you are," she said, her voice laced with mock sweetness. "But I have a proposition for you." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build, savoring the rapt attention of her audience. The entire room was watching, a silent theater of the rich and powerful. "I have a deep appreciation for true talent, you see. It's the one currency that truly matters." She let her gaze sweep over the crowd before landing back on David, pinning him in place. "So here's the deal." She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical, challenging tone that echoed in the cavernous space. "Play this piano," she declared, her words ringing with finality, "and I'll respect you." The challenge hung in the air, brutal and humiliating. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of excited, cruel whispers. This was better than any planned entertainment. David stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, some filled with pity, most with a hungry, predatory curiosity. Sophia's companions were openly smirking, enjoying the show their queen was providing. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating wave that threatened to drown him. His first instinct was to refuse, to apologize and shrink back into the shadows where he belonged. It would be the easy thing to do, the sensible thing. But then, something shifted within him. As the whispers and muffled laughter reached his ears, a different feeling began to stir in the depths of his soul, a feeling he hadn't felt in years, a surge of defiant anger. It wasn't just about him, it was about the memory he carried, the sacred promise he had made. He thought of his late wife, Elena. He could almost see her standing beside him, her warm hand on his arm, her voice in his ear, gentle but firm. "Your music is a gift, David," she used to say, her eyes shining with love and belief. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for it." She had been the light of his life, and her memory was the one thing he held sacred. This woman, this cold, arrogant billionaire, was not just mocking him. She was desecrating that memory. She was mocking the love and the music that had been the bedrock of their life together. The fear that had paralyzed him began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. The whispers of the crowd faded into a dull roar. The pitying looks no longer stung. All he could see was Sophia's smug, expectant face, and all he could hear was Elena's voice, urging him on. His heart was still pounding, but now it was a drumbeat of purpose, not of fear. He would not play for this woman's respect. He didn't care a thing for that. He would play for Elena. He would play to honor her, to feel her close to him one more time, to fill this cold, superficial room with the one true and beautiful thing he had ever created. Slowly, deliberately, David let the polishing cloth drop from his hand. It landed on the marble floor with a soft, almost inaudible sigh. He straightened his back, and for the first time, he met Sophia's gaze directly. The weariness in his eyes was still there, but now it was overlaid with a flicker of determination, a quiet dignity that was more powerful than all the wealth in the room. Without a word, he turned and began to walk towards the piano. The journey of 20 feet felt like a mile. Each step was heavy, measured. The silence in the ballroom was now so profound, it was almost a sound in itself. The air crackled with tension. He could feel the weight of every stare, the collective held breath of the city's elite. He was acutely aware of the contrast between his simple, worn-out uniform and the glittering opulence that surrounded him. His standard-issue black shoes made no sound on the plush, crimson carpet. He reached the piano and stood before it for a long moment, his hand hovering over the polished fallboard. Then, with a deep, steadying breath, he pulled out the leather-topped bench, the slight scrape of its legs against the floor sounding like a thunderclap in the stillness. He sat down, the worn fabric of his trousers rustling against the smooth leather. He took a moment to adjust his position, his posture transforming from that of a stooped laborer to that of a seasoned performer. His shoulders squared, his back straightened. He looked down at his hands, the calloused, work-worn hands of a janitor, and then placed them gently on the keys. They rested there, on the cool, pristine ivory, a perfect, poignant contrast. The room held its breath, waiting. The janitor was about to play. For a heart-stopping moment, the world was nothing but the image of his worn fingers on the pristine keys. A collective, silent question hung in the opulent air, thick with anticipation and the lingering scent of mockery. Then he played. It did not begin with a crash or a grand declaration. It began with a single crystalline note that pierced the suffocating silence like a shard of light in a dark cavern. It was a hesitant note, soft and questioning, yet it held a purity that was utterly arresting. Another followed, then a third, weaving together to form a chord so filled with a gentle, aching melancholy that it seemed to give the silence a voice. Sophia, her arms crossed and her face a mask of bored expectation, felt an involuntary twitch in her jaw. This was not the clumsy, discordant fumbling she had anticipated. This was intentional. This was music. David's eyes were closed, his body swaying almost imperceptibly as his hands began to move with a surprising, fluid familiarity across the keyboard. The initial hesitation in the notes gave way to a flowing, lyrical melody that felt like a half-remembered dream. It was a tune that spoke of quiet mornings and shared smiles, of hands held under a summer sky. The music painted pictures in the air, conjuring images of a love so simple and profound, it needed no grand pronouncements. It was the sound of two souls intertwined, a gentle, intimate dance of harmony and counterpoint. The guests, who had been poised for a spectacle of failure, were frozen in place. Conversations were forgotten, champagne flutes hung suspended in midair. The brittle atmosphere of the gala began to soften, the hard edges of cynicism and competition dissolving under the tender cascade of notes. A man near the back whispered to his wife, his voice thick with awe. "Who is this man?" She could only shake her head, her eyes wide and fixed on the janitor at the piano. Another guest, a stern-faced woman known for her ruthless corporate takeovers, found herself clutching the pearls at her throat, her knuckles white. "I've never heard anything so beautiful," she breathed, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. Sophia's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Her mind, a fortress of logic and calculation, scrambled for an explanation. It had to be a trick. A recording, perhaps? Was there a speaker hidden somewhere? She scanned the area around the piano, her sharp eyes searching for any sign of deception. But there was none. There was only the man, his worn gray uniform a stark contrast to the gleaming black of the piano. His body and soul poured into the instrument. She watched his fingers, the same fingers she had seen wiping down smudges just minutes before. Now flying across the keys with a speed and precision that would make a concert pianist weep with envy. The raw, unfiltered emotion pouring from the piano was not manufactured. It was being born in that very moment, channeled through the humble vessel of the janitor. Then the music shifted. The gentle sunlit melody deepened, descending into a minor key that was as dark and profound as the ocean floor. The tempo quickened, the notes becoming more urgent, more complex. The story the music was telling took a turn, from the sweetness of love to the gut-wrenching agony of loss. The left hand played a powerful, somber bass line, a relentless marching rhythm like the heavy tread of fate, while the right hand's melody fractured, crying out in sharp, piercing arpeggios that sounded like weeping. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of a world falling apart. It spoke of hospital rooms and final goodbyes, of the deafening silence in a home once filled with laughter. The music swelled, a tidal wave of grief that washed over the ballroom, and in its wake, it pulled the hidden sorrows of everyone in the room to the surface. A portly man in a too-tight tuxedo, the same Gregory who had joked about the pedals, began to sob openly, his shoulders shaking as he thought of the father he had lost years ago, a grief he had never properly allowed himself to feel. A young woman, a socialite famous for her vapid party photos, pressed her face into her hands, the music unearthing the secret pain of a love she had been forced to abandon. The room, once a stage for the performance of success and happiness, had become a sanctuary for shared, unspoken pain. The glittering facade of the elite had cracked, revealing the fragile, vulnerable humanity that lay beneath. Sophia stood rigid, fighting it. She was Sophia Reynolds. She did not cry. Crying was a weakness, a messy, undignified loss of control. She had built her empire on a foundation of unshakable composure. She had fired executives without blinking, crushed competitors without a flicker of remorse. Emotions were a liability, a currency she did not trade in. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, trying to anchor herself to the familiar hardness of her own will. She tried to analyze the music, to deconstruct it into chord progressions and melodic structures, to strip it of its power. But it was no use. The music was not an intellectual puzzle to be solved. It was a force of nature, a storm of pure feeling that bypassed her formidable defenses and struck directly at her heart. The melody of loss was so raw, so personal, it felt as if David was telling her own story, a story she had buried so deep she had almost convinced herself it didn't exist. The music brought back the image of her older brother, Michael, his fingers, so much like her own, dancing over the keys of their family's old upright piano. He had been the artist, the dreamer, the one with the music in his soul. He had taught her to play, his patience a warm contrast to her own fierce ambition. And then, the accident, the screech of tires, the shattering glass, the silence that followed. The music David was playing was the sound of that silence. It was the sound of her own grief, a grief she had locked away for 25 years, refusing to shed a single tear, believing that to cry would be to admit defeat. A single, hot tear escaped her eye, a traitorous drop of water that traced a path through her meticulously applied foundation. She gasped, a small, choked sound, and brought a hand to her cheek as if to wipe away the evidence of her weakness. But another tear followed, and then another. The dam had broken. The carefully constructed walls she had spent a lifetime building, the walls that had protected her, that had made her powerful, that had kept her alone, crumbled into dust. The sobs came from a place deep within her, a place she thought had died with her brother. They were ragged, ugly, uncontrollable things, and she was powerless to stop them. She, the ruthless billionaire, the queen of the corporate world, was weeping like a lost child in the middle of a ballroom filled with her peers and rivals. Through the blur of her tears, she looked at David. He was no longer just a janitor, an object of her casual cruelty. He was a conduit, a vessel for all the love and pain and beauty in the world. She saw the years of quiet suffering in the slump of his shoulders, the profound love in the gentle caress of his fingers on the keys, the unshakable dignity in the set of his jaw. He was not playing for her or for the crowd. He was playing for someone he had loved and lost, and in doing so, he was playing for all of them. She saw not a cleaner, but a true artist, a man with a soul so vast and rich that it made her own $900 million fortune feel like a handful of dust. The depth of her misjudgment, the sheer ugly arrogance of her assumptions, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had looked at this man and seen nothing but a uniform, a function, an object to be used for her own amusement. She had failed to see the person, the artist, the king hiding in plain sight. Just as the grief in the music became almost unbearable, it began to shift once more. The frantic, weeping melody softened, the dark chords resolving into something new. A theme of hope began to emerge, quiet and tentative at first, like the first rays of dawn after a long, dark night. It was not a triumphant, bombastic hope, but a quiet, resilient one. It was the hope that comes from acceptance, the understanding that love is stronger than death, that memories can be a source of comfort, not just pain. The melody soared, climbing higher and higher, no longer weeping but singing, a song of enduring love in the quiet strength of the human spirit. It was a melody of redemption, a promise that even after the most devastating loss, life could and would go on. The music filled the room not with sadness, but with a profound sense of peace, a shared catharsis that was almost holy. The final notes of the piece were as gentle and understated as the beginning, a series of soft ascending chords, like a soul ascending to the heavens, culminating in one last perfect note that hung in the air, shimmering with all the emotion that had been poured into it. It lingered for a long moment, a final, peaceful sigh, before fading into a silence that was deeper and more profound than any that had come before. It was not an empty silence, but a reverent one, filled with the echoes of the story that had just been told, a story of love, of loss, and of the enduring power of a single, beautiful song. The Janitor's song had ended, but its melody would linger in the hearts of everyone in that room forever. The silence that followed was a physical presence, a heavy, velvet curtain that had fallen upon the grand ballroom. It was a silence more profound than any that had preceded it, for it was not empty. It was filled with the ghost of the music, with the collective weight of hundreds of unearthed sorrows and the shimmering, fragile beauty of a newfound hope. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved, no one dared to breathe. The world had been remade in the space of a single song. At the piano, David Chen did not move. His hands remained on the keys, as if reluctant to break the final sacred connection to the melody. Then, a tremor ran through his body, a deep, shuddering exhalation of breath that seemed to carry with it decades of unspoken grief. He slumped forward, his forehead coming to rest against the cool, polished wood of the music rack. His shoulders, which had been so straight and proud during his performance, now shook with the aftershocks of the emotional storm he had unleashed. He was not weeping. The tears had been burned out of him long ago. This was something deeper, an exhaustion of the soul, the complete and utter depletion of a man who had just given away everything he had. The spell was finally broken by a single, choked sob from the back of the room. It was the sound of a dam breaking, and it allowed the hushed whispers to begin, a tentative ripple that quickly grew into a wave of stunned admiration. The voices were low, reverent, as if speaking in a holy place. "My God," a man murmured, his voice trembling. "He's a genius, a complete and utter genius. Where has he been hiding all this time?" Another guest, a famous art critic, asked the air, his face a mask of professional astonishment. "A talent like that, working as a janitor? It's a crime against art itself." The mockery that had filled the air just a short time ago was a distant, shameful memory. The smirks had been wiped from the faces of Sophia's companions, replaced by expressions of bewilderment and a grudging, undeniable respect. They looked from the slumped figure of the janitor to their leader, Sophia, searching for a cue, but for the first time all night, she had none to give. Sophia stood frozen in the center of the room, a statue carved from grief and revelation. The tears still glistened on her cheeks, and she made no move to wipe them away. They were a testament to her transformation, a baptism in the waters of a long-forgotten sorrow. Her usual confidence, that armor of invincibility she wore so proudly, lay in shattered pieces at her feet. In its place was a raw, aching vulnerability she had never allowed herself to feel, let alone display. She looked at David, this man she had intended to humiliate, and felt a wave of shame so profound it made her physically dizzy. He had not just played the piano, he had held up a mirror to her soul, and the reflection she saw there was ugly, petty, and impoverished in all the ways that truly mattered. With a will she didn't know she possessed, she put one foot in front of the other. Her movements were slow, deliberate, stripped of their usual predatory grace. They were the movements of a pilgrim approaching a sacred shrine. The crowd, sensing the gravity of the moment, parted for her once again, but this time it was not out of fear of her power, but out of respect for the profound human drama unfolding before them. As she walked, she felt the sting of their stares, but for once she did not care what they thought. Their opinions, their deals, their entire glittering world seemed trivial, insignificant in the face of the truth she had just been shown. She reached the piano, the gleaming black instrument that had served as the stage for both her cruelty and her redemption. She stopped beside the bench, her shadow falling over David's slumped form. He didn't stir. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and placed it gently on his shoulder. The fabric of his uniform was coarse beneath her touch, a stark, grounding reality. "That was," she began, but her voice broke, thick with an emotion she couldn't name. She cleared her throat and tried again, the words coming out as a raw, heartfelt whisper. "That was breathtaking." At her touch, at the sound of her voice, David slowly, wearily, lifted his head. He turned to look at her, and Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but they held no anger, no resentment, no triumph. They were filled with a quiet, profound dignity, the eyes of a man who was at peace with his own soul. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His expression, a mixture of sorrow, acceptance, and a deep, unshakable grace, spoke more eloquently than any words could. It was a look that did not judge her, but simply saw her in all her broken, tear-stained humanity. In that moment, looking into the depths of his weary eyes, Sophia felt an overwhelming urge to bridge the chasm of silence between them, to offer something of herself in return for the peace of his soul he had just shared. The carefully guarded secrets she had kept, locked away for a quarter of a century, suddenly felt like a crushing weight. She needed to let them go. She needed him to understand. "The song you played," she said, her voice barely audible, "a confession meant for him alone. It told a story. Your story, I know. But it was my story, too." David's expression flickered with a quiet curiosity, and he listened, his gaze never leaving her face. "I had a brother," Sophia continued, the words tasting strange and foreign on her tongue. She had not spoken his name aloud in years. "His name was Michael. He was older than me, and he was the music. Our family was not like this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "We had very little, but we had an old, out-of-tune, upright piano, and Michael could make it sing. He taught me how to play. He had your hands." She glanced down at David's hands, still resting on the keys. Gentle and sure. He used to say that music was the world's secret language, that it could say the things that words were too clumsy for. She paused, swallowing against the lump that had formed in her throat. He was going to be a composer. He had a scholarship to a conservatory. He was brilliant and kind, and he was the best part of me. When he was 20, there was an accident, a drunk driver. He was gone in an instant. She took a shaky breath, the memory as sharp and painful as it had been on the day it happened. "I was there. I saw it all. And after he was gone, the music was gone too. I stopped playing. I couldn't bear the silence he left behind, so I decided to fill my life with noise, with work, with money, with power, anything to keep from hearing that silence. I told myself that feelings were a weakness, that caring was a liability. I built a fortress around my heart, and I thought I was safe. I thought I was strong." Her voice cracked, and a fresh wave of tears welled in her eyes. "Tonight, Your music, you tore that fortress down. You made me hear the silence again. But you also filled it with something beautiful. You played the song of my own heart, a song I thought I had forgotten how to hear. You gave my brother's memory a voice again." She finally looked away from him, her gaze falling on the piano keys, the black and white stage of their shared story. "I am so, so sorry," she whispered, the apology encompassing so much more than her earlier mockery. It was an apology for her arrogance, for her cruelty, for the person she had allowed herself to become. David listened to her confession, his quiet dignity a steady anchor in the storm of her emotion. When she finished, a profound silence settled between them. Then, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of understanding, of acceptance, of forgiveness. He had heard her. He had understood. Sophia felt a sense of release so profound, it was almost dizzying. She had shared her deepest wound with a stranger, a man she had wronged, and he had met her not with judgment, but with grace. A new feeling began to dawn within her, a sense of purpose, of clarity. It was not enough to apologize. It was not enough to feel remorse. She had to act. She had to do something to honor the gift this man had given her. She straightened up, her newfound humility now tempered with a familiar spark of determination, but it was a determination that was no longer fueled by ego, but by a genuine desire to do good. "David Chen," she said, his name feeling solid and real on her tongue. "You are an artist, a great artist. The world needs to hear your music, not in a half-empty ballroom at the end of a long night, but in a place built for it. A place where people will come specifically to listen, to be moved, to be changed, just as I have been changed tonight." She looked him directly in the eye, her voice clear and strong, ringing with a sincerity that no one in the room had ever heard from her before. "My company has just completed construction on a new performing arts center downtown. It's a state-of-the-art facility, with acoustics designed by the best engineers in the world. The grand opening is in 3 months. She took a deep breath, laying her proposition before him like a sacred offering. "I want you to be its first resident musician. You will have the main stage, the grand concert hall, all to yourself. You will have a salary, a staff, anything and everything you need. You will not have to answer to anyone. Your only job will be to do what you did tonight, to create, to play, to share your gift with the world." The offer hung in the air, as stunning and unexpected as the music itself. A collective gasp went through the assembled guests. The janitor offered the most prestigious musical position in the city by the very woman who had tried to make him a laughingstock. It was a fairy tale unfolding in real time. David stared at her, his eyes wide with a shock that momentarily eclipsed his quiet composure. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He looked from Sophia's earnest, tear-streaked face to the sea of stunned faces in the crowd, then back to the piano keys under his hands. The resident musician, a concert hall, a salary to just play. It was the dream he and Elena had whispered about in the dark, a fantasy so distant and impossible it had felt like wishing for the moon. He had spent 30 years in the shadows, making himself invisible. His music, a secret kept only for himself and the ghost of his wife. The thought of a spotlight, of a stage, of thousands of expectant faces was terrifying. It was too much. Sophia saw the fear and hesitation in his eyes, the instinct to retreat back into the comfortable anonymity of the shadows. She understood it. She had spent her life building walls, and she knew how frightening it was to even contemplate stepping out from behind them. "You don't have to give me an answer now," she said, her voice softening, gentle and reassuring. "Just think about it. Please. A gift like yours, it doesn't belong in the dark. It belongs to the light." She held his gaze for a moment longer, a silent plea passing between them, a shared understanding that this was about more than just a job offer. It was about redemption. It was about second chances. It was about the quiet, unassuming janitor and the ruthless, broken billionaire, two people from entirely different worlds, brought together by the transcendent power of a simple song. It was the beginning of a new melody, one of hope, of healing, and of a legacy that was just waiting to be written. The ballroom remained silent, the guests bearing witness to the profound, life-altering connection that had been forged on the black and white keys of the grand piano. The days that followed the gala were a strange, disorienting dream for David. He had been escorted from the hotel by a silent, respectful security guard, bypassing the lingering, curious guests, and driven home in a luxury sedan that felt more like a spaceship than a car. Back in the familiar quiet of his small, meticulously clean apartment, the silence was different. It was no longer a comforting blanket, but a vast, empty stage, echoing with the memory of the music and the impossible weight of Sophia Reynolds' offer. He tried to return to his routine, to the simple grounding tasks of polishing his worn shoes and watering the single resilient orchid Elena had loved, but the world had tilted on its axis. The shadows he had lived in for 3 decades no longer felt safe. They felt like a cage. A few days later, a formal invitation arrived, not a command, but a request, printed on thick cream-colored cardstock. It asked for his presence at Reynolds Tower. The same sleek black car from the gala purred at the curb at the appointed time. As David, dressed in his cleanest, plainest clothes, was whisked through the city's bustling arteries, he felt like a ghost being transported to a world he was never meant to see. Sophia's office was on the top floor, a kingdom in the sky. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, opening into a space that was less an office and more a testament to absolute power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the entire city, a sprawling map of buildings and lives that seemed impossibly small from this height. The room was a study in minimalist opulence, vast and white, with a single massive desk of dark, polished wood that looked like a sacrificial altar. Yet, David noticed a change. On a low table, next to 2 plush armchairs, sat a simple glass vase holding a small bouquet of freesias, their delicate scent a fragile human note in the sterile air of command. Sophia was not behind her desk. She stood by the window, looking out at her city, but she turned as he entered. The severe black gown was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. The formidable armor of the CEO was gone, and in its place was the woman he had seen in the ballroom, her eyes clear, but still holding the memory of tears. There was no mockery in her gaze now, only a quiet, profound respect. "David," she said, her voice soft, "thank you for coming. Please, sit. Can I get you some tea?" The offer was so normal, so disarmingly kind, that it threw him off more than any command would have. He sat stiffly on the edge of one of the armchairs, his work-worn hands clasped nervously in his lap. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm fine." Sophia gave him a small, patient smile and sat in the other chair, creating a small island of intimacy in the vastness of the office. "Sophia, please. After what you shared the other night, I think we can dispense with the formalities." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I meant what I said, David, about the offer. I understand it's a lot to take in." "I know you've spent a long time away from the spotlight." David swallowed, finding his voice. "I'm a janitor, ma'am, Sophia. I clean floors. I haven't thought about stages or concerts in a lifetime." The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. The thought of all those people, all those expectations was suffocating. His music was his. It was Elena's. It was a private, sacred thing. To put it on a stage felt like a betrayal, a profanation. "You're a musician," Sophia corrected him gently, but with a firm conviction. "One of the most gifted I have ever heard. What you do is not just playing notes, David. You tell stories. You heal people. You healed a part of me I thought was dead and buried." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "A gift like that, it comes with a responsibility. To hide it away is, forgive me, a kind of selfishness. Think of all the people out there, living in their own quiet silence, who need to hear your song. Think of the hope you could give them." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had always thought of his music as a private memorial, a way to keep his own grief from consuming him. He had never considered that it could be a balm for others. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars from years of labor. Could these hands, which had held mops and scrub brushes for so long, truly create something that could heal? He thought of Elena. He could almost hear her voice, warm and full of unwavering belief. "Your music is a gift, David. It's meant to be shared. It's a light, and you can't keep a light under a bushel basket." He had let that light go out when she died, burying it under a mountain of grief and fear. He had chosen the safety of the shadows, convincing himself it was a form of loyalty to her memory, to keep their music just for them. But now, hearing Sophia's words, hearing the echo of his wife's, he wondered if he had been wrong. Perhaps the greatest way to honor Elena was not to hide the music they had shared, but to let it shine for the whole world. Perhaps this wasn't just an opportunity for him, but a way to keep her spirit, her boundless love of life and art, alive. After a long silence, he finally looked up, meeting Sophia's patient gaze. A quiet resolve settled over him, pushing back the tide of fear. "I'm not sure I'm ready for the spotlight," he said, his voice low but steady. "But I am ready to honor my wife's memory." He took a deep, steadying breath. "I will accept your offer." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Sophia's face, a genuine, uncalculated expression of joy that transformed her features, making her look younger, softer. "Thank you, David," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You won't regret this." The story broke the next morning. It was not a carefully managed press release from Reynolds Industries, but a torrent, a flash flood of rumor and eyewitness accounts that erupted on social media and was quickly snatched up by every news outlet in the city. The tale of the billionaire CEO, humbled and brought to tears by the haunting melody of a humble janitor, was an irresistible modern-day fairy tale. It spread like wildfire. The hashtag #SargJanitorVirtuoso was trending worldwide within hours. News vans camped outside David's modest apartment building. Talk shows debated the story, their hosts speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Blog posts were written, dissecting the event, calling it a parable for the modern age, a story of hidden talent, second chances, and the power of art to transcend class and wealth. Sophia, in her new role as David's patron, shielded him from the worst of the media frenzy. But she did not try to stop the story. She understood that it had become something larger than both of them. It was a narrative of hope that a cynical world was desperate to believe in. She watched, fascinated, as the public's imagination was captured. Artists created renderings of the scene, David at the piano, bathed in a single spotlight, Sophia weeping in the background. The story became a symbol, a testament to the idea that genius could be found in the most unexpected of places, and that true wealth was not measured in stock portfolios, but in the richness of the human soul. In the weeks that followed, a new routine, a new life, began to take shape for David. Sophia was true to her word. She became his guide, his protector, and, unexpectedly, his friend. She arranged for him to move into a quiet, comfortable apartment in a secure building, away from the prying eyes of the press. She took him to the newly completed Reynolds Center for the Arts, a breathtaking cathedral of glass and steel. David stood with her on the stage of the main concert hall, a vast, beautiful space that could seat 3,000 people. He looked out at the sea of empty velvet chairs, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and awe. The grand piano that sat center stage, a magnificent instrument identical to the one at the gala, seemed both an invitation and a challenge. "It's big," David had whispered, his voice lost in the cavernous space. Sophia had stood beside him, not crowding him, but offering a quiet, solid presence. "You'll fill it," she had said with absolute certainty. "The moment you touch the keys, this whole room will feel as intimate as your own living room." Their friendship blossomed in the shared, quiet spaces of the concert hall. She would often cancel board meetings or delegate multi-million-dollar decisions to her subordinates, just to come and sit in the empty auditorium while David practiced. She never offered musical advice. She knew she had nothing to teach him there, but she listened. She listened with the same rapt attention she had on the night of the gala, her presence a silent, unwavering source of support. They began to talk, sharing stories of their pasts. He told her more about Elena, about their simple life together, about the songs he wrote for her. She, in turn, told him more about Michael, about the fierce protective love she had for her brother. and the crushing guilt she had carried for so long. In helping David find his voice, Sophia began to rediscover her own. She found a joy and a profound sense of fulfillment in nurturing his talent that no corporate acquisition, no nine-figure deal had ever provided. She had spent her life acquiring things, companies, properties, power, but she realized now that the most valuable thing she had ever acquired was this unlikely friendship. She saw the world differently. She started a foundation in her brother's name, the Michael Reynolds Foundation for the Arts, to provide scholarships and instruments to underprivileged children, the very first and largest donation being made to the foundation David was establishing in Elena's name. Her employees noticed a change in her. The sharp cutting edge of her personality had softened. She smiled more. She listened more. She saw the people behind the job titles. As the date of the debut concert approached, the anticipation reached a fever pitch. The tickets had sold out in less than 10 minutes, the demand crashing the Art Center's website. The media hype was relentless. David Chen, the janitor virtuoso, was no longer just a local curiosity. He was an international phenomenon. For David, the pressure was immense, but with Sophia's steady friendship as his anchor, the fear was slowly being replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. He was not just playing for himself anymore, or even just for Elena. He was playing for everyone who had ever felt invisible, for everyone who had ever lost someone they loved, for everyone who needed to be reminded that, even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of a song. He was ready to step out of the shadows and into the light. The night of the concert arrived like a held breath. The Reynolds Center for the Arts, Sophia's gleaming new cathedral of culture, was a beacon of light against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Its glass facade shimmered, reflecting the city lights back onto themselves, a jewel box waiting to be opened. And tonight, it was packed to the rafters. The energy inside was a palpable thing, a low, electric hum of anticipation that vibrated through the plush carpets and up the sweeping marble staircases. This was not the jaded, cynical crowd of the gala. This was a pilgrimage. They had come from all corners of the city and beyond. There were seasoned music lovers in elegant evening wear, their faces etched with a critical curiosity, eager to witness the birth of a supposed legend. There were young students, clutching their tickets like holy relics, their eyes wide with the romance of the story. There were ordinary people, couples on date nights, families, individuals who had been moved by the tale of the janitor virtuoso and had come seeking a measure of that same hope. And scattered amongst them, like ghosts at a feast, were many of the same faces from the gala. They were quieter tonight, their arrogance replaced by a hushed reverence. Gregory, the portly man who had made the cruel joke about the pedals, was there with his wife, his usual boisterous demeanor subdued, his program clutched tightly in his hand. They were all here not to judge, but to bear witness. Backstage, in the pristine, sterile warren of dressing rooms, the electric hum of the crowd felt like a physical weight. David Chen was a bundle of raw, frayed nerves. He paced the length of his small, private room, the soft carpet doing nothing to muffle the frantic, hammering rhythm of his own heart. The simple, tailored black suit Sophia had insisted on felt like a costume, the fabric stiff and alien against his skin. This was a world of spotlights and velvet seats, a world he had only ever observed from the periphery, from the shadows with a mop and bucket. The sheer, crushing weight of expectation was a physical force pressing down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. He was no longer just David Chen, the man who played for the memory of his wife. He was a phenomenon, a hashtag, a modern-day fairy tale, the janitor virtuoso. The title felt like a brand, a label that had been seared onto his soul. What if he couldn't live up to it? What if the music that had poured from him at the gala was a fluke, a one-time confluence of grief and defiance? The fear was a cold, coiling serpent in his gut, whispering that he was an imposter, a fraud. He looked at his hands, the hands that had accepted Sophia's offer, and they were trembling. He was afraid that when he touched the piano tonight, they would be nothing more than a janitor's hands again, clumsy and mute. The door opened softly, and Sophia stepped inside. She was wearing a simple dark blue dress, her only jewelry a pair of small pearl earrings. There was no trace of the formidable CEO, only the quiet concern of a friend. She saw the panic in his eyes, the way he was pacing like a caged animal, and her heart went out to him. "David," she said gently, her voice a calm anchor in his storm of anxiety. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea. "I can't do it, Sophia," he whispered, the words ragged. "I can't. They're all out there, waiting for a miracle. I'm just a man. The music, it was for Elena. It was private. I don't know how to do it on command. For them." Sophia closed the door behind her and walked towards him, her steps measured and calm. She didn't touch him, but her presence was a comforting warmth in the cold, bright room. "Look at me, David," she said, waiting until his terrified gaze met hers. "You're right. You're not a miracle. You're a man with a gift. And you're right about something else, too. The music is for Elena. It always will be. Don't ever think you have to change that." She took a step closer, her voice dropping, becoming more intense, more personal. "Don't play for them," she said, gesturing towards the wall that separated them from the 3,000-seat auditorium. "Don't play for the critics or the news cameras or for the myth of the janitor virtuoso. Forget about all of that. It's just noise." She paused, letting her words sink in. "When you walk out there, I want you to do exactly what you did at the gala. Find that quiet place in your heart, the one where Elena lives, the one where the music is born. Go there and play for her. Play the story of your love, your loss, your hope. Play it with all the honesty and all the truth you have in you." She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Just play from the heart, David. That's all anyone wants to hear. That's the only miracle they need." Her words were a balm to his frayed soul. Play for Elena. It was so simple. It was the one thing he knew how to do. The serpent of fear in his gut began to uncoil. The crushing weight of expectation lessened, replaced by the familiar, bittersweet ache of love and memory. He could do that. He could play for her. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in hours, his heart began to beat a little slower. He gave her a small, grateful nod. "It's time," the stage manager said softly from the doorway. David took one last deep breath, the air filling his lungs with a newfound resolve. He walked out of the dressing room, past Sophia, who gave his arm a gentle, supportive squeeze. He walked down the dimly lit corridor and stepped into the wings of the stage. The roar of the expectant crowd was a physical wave of sound. He paused, hidden in the darkness, and then he walked onto the stage. The single, brilliant spotlight found him, and he was momentarily blinded, a lone figure in a vast ocean of darkness. A wave of applause, thunderous and welcoming, washed over him. He walked to the center of the stage, to the magnificent concert grand piano that waited for him like an old friend. He gave a short, humble bow to the unseen audience, the applause swelling in response. Then he sat down on the bench, the familiar feel of the leather grounding him. He looked down at the 88 keys, a landscape of black and white that felt more like home than any place on earth. He placed his hands on the cool ivory, and a sense of profound calm washed over him. He closed his eyes. The roar of the crowd faded. The blinding spotlight disappeared. The vast auditorium dissolved. He was alone, in the quiet, sacred space of his heart, and Elena was there with him. He took a breath, and he began to play. The first notes were the same ones that had silenced the gala. They were soft, crystalline, and filled with that same gentle, aching melancholy. A hush fell over the 3,000 people in the audience, a collective intake of breath as they were transported back to the moment the legend was born. The melody unfolded, the story of a simple, profound love, and the room was spellbound. But then something changed. The music, which had been so deeply personal, so insular at the gala, began to open up. The melody, while still rooted in the love for Elena, became broader, more expansive. It was as if David, having found the courage to share his own story, was now inviting everyone in the room to share theirs. The theme of loss was still there, a dark, powerful undercurrent, but it was no longer just about his own grief. It was a universal sorrow, a lament for every heart that had ever been broken, for every soul that had ever been lost. The music wept, not just for Elena, but for Sophia's brother Michael, for Gregory's father, for the secret sorrows of every single person in the auditorium. Watching from the wings, Sophia felt tears welling in her eyes again, but these were not the ragged, painful tears of the gala. These were tears of awe, of pride, of a joy so profound it felt holy. She was witnessing not just a performance, but a communion. David was no longer just a man playing a song, he was a healer, a conduit for a shared human experience. The music was filled with a newfound confidence, a sense of purpose that had been absent before. His fingers didn't just dance across the keys, they commanded them. The music swelled, moving from the depths of grief into a soaring, breathtaking passage of hope. It was the melody of second chances, of redemption, of the incredible, unlikely friendship that had been forged between a janitor and a billionaire. It was the sound of walls coming down, of light pouring into darkness. The concert was a journey. It took the audience through the valleys of their deepest sorrows and then lifted them to the peaks of their most resilient hopes. The music was a tapestry woven from love, loss, grief, friendship, and ultimately, a triumphant, life-affirming joy. The final piece was not a somber memorial, but a celebration. It was a vibrant, powerful anthem of the strength of the human spirit, of the enduring power of love to transcend even death itself. The final notes did not fade into a sad silence, but rang out with a clear, brilliant, and joyful finality. For a single, heart-stopping beat, there was absolute silence. 3,000 people held a collective breath, united in the profound shared catharsis of the moment. Then, the room erupted. It was not just applause, it was a roar, a physical explosion of sound and emotion. One person leaped to their feet, then a dozen, then 100, and in a matter of seconds, the entire auditorium was standing, the applause thundering, echoing off the perfectly engineered walls. People were weeping openly, not with sadness, but with a sense of release and overwhelming joy. They were cheering, shouting, "Bravo!" their voices hoarse. At the piano, David opened his eyes, the sound of the ovation washing over him, pulling him back into the reality of the room. He saw the sea of faces, 3,000 people, on their feet, their faces alight with emotion, all for him, for his music, for Elena's song. A slow, wondrous smile spread across his face, and for the first time in 30 years, the weariness in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a brilliant, shining light. He stood up, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the performance and the overwhelming emotion of the reception, and he bowed, a deep, grateful bow from the heart. The critics, hardened and cynical by trade, were on their feet with everyone else, their notebooks forgotten, their faces filled with the rare, unmistakable thrill of having witnessed the arrival of a true generational talent. They were not just listening to a new musician, they were listening to a new voice in the world of music, a voice of profound authenticity and soul. As the applause continued to thunder, wave after wave, David finally walked off the stage, his legs unsteady. His body drenched in sweat, his soul utterly spent but soaring. He stepped into the wings and Sophia was there. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She simply opened her arms and he walked into them, and she held him in a fierce, proud embrace. Watching him take his bow from the wings, a sense of pride and joy so immense it almost buckled her knees washed over Sophia. It was a feeling unlike any she had ever known. It dwarfed the thrill of a 9-figure acquisition. It made the feeling of crushing a competitor seem petty and hollow. This was different. This was real. This was creation. She had not just discovered a great artist. She realized with a clarity that was as sharp and bright as the final note of his song. She had helped him find his voice. She had helped him step into the light, and in doing so, she had finally, truly, stepped out of the shadows of her own past. The concert was a triumph, a vindication, not just for the janitor who had become a virtuoso, but for the billionaire who had, at long last, discovered the true meaning of wealth. The thunder of the ovation was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that followed David off the stage and into the wings. He stumbled, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer, overwhelming force of 3,000 souls pouring their gratitude onto him. He was adrift in a sea of noise and blinding light, his legs unsteady, his heart a wild drum against his ribs. Then, through the dizzying whirlwind, he saw Sophia. She was there, her face a beautiful, tear-streaked mess of pride and awe. She didn't speak, she simply opened her arms, and he walked into her embrace. It wasn't the tentative, hesitant touch of the ballroom, but a fierce, solid hug, an anchor in the storm. For a moment, they just stood there, two survivors of a beautiful shipwreck, clinging to each other while the applause roared on. The backstage area, moments before a zone of quiet tension, had erupted into a controlled, joyous chaos. Stagehands were grinning, giving him thumbs up. The Art Center's director was babbling incoherently about history being made. But it was all a blur to David. The only reality was the solid ground of Sophia's friendship and the echoing ghost of Elena's song. A woman with a press pass and sharp, intelligent eyes managed to break through the small cordon of security Sophia's assistant had formed. She was from a major arts journal, her reputation for incisive, often brutal, reviews preceding her. Tonight, however, her face held no cynicism, only a profound, stunned respect. "Maestro Chen," she said, her voice cutting through the din with practiced authority. "An astonishing debut. The world will be talking about this night for years. You must tell us, the music, it felt so incredibly personal. What is its story?" David pulled back from Sophia's embrace, though they remained standing side by side, a united front. He looked at the journalist, his mind still catching up to the new reality of being called Maestro. He thought of how to answer, how to put 30 years of love and loss into a simple soundbite. He decided not to try. He would just tell the truth. "The music," he began, his voice quiet but clear, carrying a new, calm authority, "is the story of my wife, Elena. She passed away many years ago. She believed that music was the world's secret language. I wrote these songs for her, to keep her memory alive, to have a conversation with her when I could no longer hear her voice. So tonight I was just talking to my wife." The journalist's professional mask softened, her eyes misting slightly. "It was a beautiful conversation," she said softly. David nodded, a lump forming in his throat, but he wasn't finished. He turned his head and looked directly at Sophia, whose own eyes were glistening. He reached out and took her hand, a simple public gesture of connection that spoke volumes. But this night, this conversation, it would have remained a whisper, if not for one person, he continued, his voice gaining strength. The small crowd of backstage personnel and media quieted, leaning in to hear. This night would never have happened without Sophia Reynolds. He squeezed her hand. "At a time when no one saw me, when I was invisible, she saw the man behind the uniform. More than that, she heard the music when it was just a silent ache in my heart. She gave it a stage. She gave it a voice for the world to hear. The songs are Elena's, but the music you heard tonight, that belongs to Sophia." A collective sigh went through the small group. Sophia's composure finally broke completely. A fresh tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time she smiled through it, a brilliant, radiant smile of pure, unadulterated joy. She had sought respect through power and fear for so long, but this freely given tribute from the man she had once mocked, this felt like the only respect that had ever truly mattered. In the months that followed, the world rearranged itself around David Chen. The moniker Janitor Virtuoso faded, replaced by the more fitting and respectful Maestro Chen. His debut album, a live recording of that first concert, shattered sales records for a classical release, going platinum in a dozen countries. His concerts, whether in London, Tokyo, or Vienna, were instant sellouts, attended by royalty, celebrities, and ordinary people, all seeking the same catharsis, the same touch of grace. He was no longer a fairy tale, he was a living legend. Yet, the man himself remained unchanged. He moved through the world of five-star hotels and private jets with the same quiet humility he'd had when pushing a cleaning cart. With Sophia's expert guidance, he navigated the treacherous waters of fame and fortune, never losing sight of his anchor. A significant portion of his earnings went directly into establishing the Elena Chen Foundation for Musical Arts. Its mission was simple: to put instruments into the hands of underprivileged children and to fund teachers in schools where arts programs had been cut. One crisp autumn afternoon, David stood in the wings of a community center auditorium in a forgotten, struggling part of the city. The center had been refurbished and its music program resurrected by a joint grant from his foundation and Sophia's Michael Reynolds Foundation. On the stage, a young girl, no older than 10, with fierce, determined eyes and a worn-out dress, was having her first violin lesson. Her initial attempts were a series of screeching, painful squeaks, but her teacher was patient, gently adjusting her posture, the placement of her small fingers. Then, the girl drew the bow across the strings and produced a single, clear, resonant note. It wasn't a melody, it wasn't a song, but it was music. The girl's face broke into a smile of pure, unadulterated wonder. David smiled too, a deep, contented smile. This was his legacy. Not the sold-out concert halls or the platinum albums. It was this. It was the lighting of a single new candle from the flame of his and Elena's love. Around the same time, Sophia sat down for an interview with a major news magazine. They were profiling her for their Person of the Year issue, citing her philanthropic revolution and the cultural phenomenon she had unleashed. The journalist, a seasoned veteran, leaned forward with a practiced, engaging smile. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, "you've had a remarkable year. You've closed deals worth billions. Your company's stock is at an all-time high. But many are saying your greatest discovery, your most valuable acquisition, wasn't a company at all, but a man, David Chen. Would you agree?" Sophia smiled, a warm, genuine expression that was becoming her new default. "David Chen is not an acquisition," she corrected him gently. "He is a dear friend, and he is a gift. Not just to me, but to the world." The journalist pressed. "But you can't deny the impact. You've changed his life, and in doing so, you've burnished your own legacy. People see you differently now." "It is not I who changed David's life," Sophia said, her voice dropping, becoming more introspective. "It is he who changed mine. For years, I measured my life by the bottom line. I equated wealth with stock prices and market share. I thought power was about winning, about dominating. I was the richest woman in the room and the most impoverished soul." She looked past the journalist, her gaze distant, as if seeing the ballroom of the Monarch Hotel once more. "David taught me that true wealth has nothing to do with money or power. It's about the connections we make, the lives we touch. It's about seeing the humanity in someone, even when they're wearing a janitor's uniform. He taught me that the most valuable thing you can ever possess is a gift you can give away. My brother Michael had that gift. David has it. And now, through our foundations, we're trying to pass it on. That is a legacy far more valuable than anything that can be traded on the stock exchange." The final scene of their story did not take place on a stage, under the glare of spotlights. It took place in the quiet, sun-drenched music room of Sophia's penthouse apartment. The room was filled with light, overlooking the park, a peaceful sanctuary high above the city's roar. In the center of the room stood not a concert grand, but a beautiful, older, upright piano, the kind one might find in a family home, its wood warm and worn with age. David and Sophia sat side by side on the bench, their shoulders almost touching. They were not performing. There was no audience. They were simply playing. It was a simple, beautiful melody, a four-hand piece that was more of a quiet conversation than a composition. His hands, still calloused but now impossibly famous, laid down the gentle chordal foundation. Her hands, which had once signed billion-dollar contracts with cold efficiency, now moved with a rediscovered grace, weaving a light lyrical melody over his. They played in comfortable silence, a shared smile passing between them as they navigated a particularly lovely turn of phrase. The music they made was not filled with the profound sorrow of David's first concert, nor the triumphant, soaring power of his debut. It was filled with a quiet, contented peace. It was the sound of friendship, of two people from impossibly different worlds who had found a common language, a shared home on the 88 keys of a piano. The song ended, the final chord hanging in the sunlit air, a perfect, peaceful harmony. They sat there for a moment, their hands resting on the keys in the quiet afterglow of the music. "That was lovely," David said softly. "Michael would have liked that one," Sophia replied, her voice thick with a happy, peaceful nostalgia. The story had come full circle. The piano, once a stage for humiliation and a catalyst for redemption, was now simply a place of connection, a testament to their unlikely, unbreakable bond. The legacy of David's music and Sophia's kindness was not written in headlines or history books, but in the quiet, ongoing melody of their friendship, and in the new songs being sparked in community centers and schoolrooms across the country. Talent can be found in the most unexpected of places, and a single act of kindness, even one born from a place of arrogance, can change the course of a life. The Janitor's song had not just brought a billionaire to tears, it had healed her, and in doing so, had created a legacy of music and compassion that would echo for generations. A quiet, hopeful melody, a testament to the enduring, transformative, and triumphant power of the human spirit.